Hey guys, welcome into the very first episode of Divergent States, the unofficial psychonaut podcast. Excited to be here. I'm here tonight with my friend, co-host, producer, Bryan. Thank you, Bryan.
Yeah, no problem. How's it going?
Pretty good. I'm excited to finally get this going. I've run the subreddit and for 16 years, and it's been a labor of love. And I'll probably tell the story again and again. I'm sure everybody will get tired of hearing it, but I started it just out of a desire to kind of talk to friends and of what we'd talk about when we do psychedelics, and I've kind of felt like this was just a natural extension of that. And so, yeah, I know you're not as experienced, so I think it'd be fun to bring you along on the journey. So,
Oh yeah, I'm excited. Like you said, I don't have a lot of experience with psychedelics. I mean, I've tried here and there. I've done a couple things, but um, not like like passionately or consistently in any capacity. But knowing the benefits that are out there and looking at some of the research, those are the things that I'm excited about.
right, and it's been a lot of fun so far. Just reaching out and then starting to talk to some of our guests here. So tonight we're going to be talking to Dr. Rick Strassman. Bryan, I wish you could have been there. He had work stuff. Speaking of which,
Right.
support us on the Patreon. That's going to be our hashtag help Bryan quit his job fund.
That'd be great. But no, I'm having a good time. I'm out here in Vegas right now, getting ready for the MJ BizCon, which would be a lot of fun.
Right. And speaking of that, we've been kind of chatting with Maps, and we might be going to Vegas, or no, it'd be Colorado. My bad. So we'll be going out there to somewhere out west to possibly the Psychedelic Conference 2025, which could be a lot of fun.
Could be a lot of fun.
Right. So tonight, again, I'll be talking to Dr. Rick Strassman. He's a world renowned figure in the field of psychedelic research, best known for his pioneering studies on DMT at the University of New Mexico. He conducted the first U.S. government approved human trials for psychedelics in over 20 years. He's got his BA in biological sciences from Stanford University and his MD from the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. He's got an extensive background, academic and clinical, just everything psychiatry, psychopharmacology, spiritual studies. His groundbreaking book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, not only illuminated the profound experiences of DMT users, but also inspired a widely acclaimed documentary of the same name. Dr. Strassman has appeared on many prominent platforms: Joe Rogan, MAPS conferences, common speaker, just a well known figure throughout. So I think this is going to be a great interview. We're going to sit and take a listen. We'll come back and we'll give some thank yous and acknowledgments, and hope you guys enjoy. Strassman, thank you so much for being here, and thank you for being our first guest on the very first episode.
Well, thanks for having me as your first guest.
Oh, you're very welcome. I got your email when you were talking about coming up for the AMA in your book, and I just finished the first script. I was looking at doing something on maybe set and setting, and then I got your AMA request. I was like, man, it's like kismet. So yeah, it's great to have you here. So most of our listeners are probably going to be familiar with you from your work, DMT, the Spirit Molecule. It's been a huge part about how we talk about psychedelics, DMT, consciousness, and even spirituality. You talk about it a little in your new book, but could you share what initially drew you to studying DMT and what kind of stood out to you most in those early years of doing your research?
Yeah, the main impetus there are a few reasons for my doing my studies. They matured as time went on. Like as I was, thinking about performing the DMT research, At first, my interests came about from an interest in correlating the experiences that some people had on meditation with those brought on by psychedelics. I thought to the extent that they resembled each other, there must be some common biological denominator. And I was even back then in college interested in what has turned out to be, or what was coming about at the time as modern psychopharmacology, the relationship between pharmacology and the mind, mind altering drugs, both for mental illness and for other purposes. I was intrigued by the overlap in descriptions of the two sets of experiences. Um, not long after that, I was interested or became obsessed in a way with, the notion that psychedelics, could save the world. If only everybody, could have a big experience on LSD, they'd be happy, they'd be healthy, there'd be world peace, those kinds of things. So there were practical, like everyday, scientific, questions that I wanted to answer, which kind of were closely linked with some messianic idealism. The messianic idealism took a back seat after a while, and I was more focused on the basic psychopharmacological questions. Was there a biological correlate of the altered states brought on by drugs and the altered states that were brought on by meditation? And I was first drawn to the pineal gland just because of its esoteric connotations. I learned about melatonin, ran a melatonin study in the early or the mid 1980s. And there wasn't much known about melatonin back then. There were some indications that it was quite psychoactive. It made depressed people more depressed, even psychotic. It might have helped psychosis. It might have worsened psychosis in schizophrenics. We didn't really know that much about it back then. So we did a painstaking study of melatonin psychopharmacology and found out it was only sedating, which everybody knows now. Yeah, and so by that time, I had learned about DMT, which was which is a known psychedelic, and it is made in the body. So I turned my attention from melatonin research to DMT.
Yeah, that's, I mean, yeah, this is kind of, you go over that a little bit in your book and you talk about how you go on the, it's the messianic, the early, your early draft of your script to the messianic kind of ideals. And that kind of leads me into the next question people, were talking about. And I know you've kind of answered on the subreddit before saying, it's kind of annoying how people will get your kind of theoretical, hypothetical research and ideas and kind of run with it. And the question, I guess, would be a lot of the psychonauts that seem to be interested in DMT for spiritual experiences and things associated with it. Do you think it's something connected beyond our minds, like a Jungian collective consciousness, or as you talk about in your book with Aristotle's theory of active intellect? Or are these more of an experiences of an internal reflection of our own consciousness?
Yeah, I don't think we can really, tell at this point. I do speculate in the DMT book, The Spirit Molecule, about parallel universes and dark matter and those kinds of things. But I've tempered my uh, speculation to, I guess, just referring to the things that we see, especially the beings, which a lot of people are focused on, as revealing things which were previously invisible. So that covers all the bases. It might be out there and we couldn't see it before, or it might be in here and we couldn't see it before. Um, the issue of Aristotle's notion of the intellect and the imagination. The imagination contains things which are perceptible, as opposed to the rational faculty, where you intellect things, you think about them as opposed to perceiving them. So my theory or my belief is within an Aristotelian model, that psychedelics stimulate the imagination more than they do the intellect. And, the visions and the voices and the emotions and the somatic effects are much more pronounced than any specifically new ideas. The old ideas which one contains take on new meaning, more significance. But I think meaning and significance are more of a felt thing, more of an imaginative activity. So if you think of psychedelics as preferentially stimulating the imagination, it makes things perceptible, apprehensible, which wasn't the case before. So as opposed
Yeah.
to trying to figure out where do the beings reside, I think at this point it's probably more important to figure out how to learn as much as we can from what information they seem to be trying to convey.
Right. Yeah, I agree with you there. That, like I said, and I kind of it's kind of a Jungian, or that's how I kind of perceive it, as more of a collective consciousness. That it's archetypes that we kind of reflect from reflections from our own consciousness that kind of are really. Yeah, they just tend to take form. So have any of your own experiences with altered states influenced the way you approach your research?
Well, I wouldn't have performed any of my studies if it weren't for my own experiences. Yeah, I think there's a there's a couple of ways, I guess, that my altered states experiences over the years have influenced me. Um, one was to become a psychiatrist, because I could relate to mental illness, because some of the states were extremely unpleasant, and I got through them, understood them to the best extent that I could. Yeah, so I think those experiences both fostered my interest in psychiatry and made me a better psychiatrist. Those experiences stimulated my interest in psychopharmacology, like how do drugs affect the mind, and and could those effects be turned to good sorts of purposes. Um, and also, it stimulated my interest in actual practice of spiritual tradition. I was raised in a Jewish household, but there wasn't much feeling involved in Judaism as understood by my family, and the impactful quality of a big psychedelic experience made me start looking for practices or traditions which emphasized direct experience, and Buddhism was increasingly popular back then, and I happened to find a good organization, a supportive community, an impressive teacher, yeah, and which began a decades long relationship with Zen study and practice. And also, I think it influenced my handling of others psychedelic experiences. Like, oh, I would do this if I were you, or I wouldn't do that if I were you. So I. Uh, when it seemed appropriate, I would give people advice based on my own experiences.
Yeah, I've always found I love the utility of Zen Buddhism. It's very practical. It's very you can use it in your everyday life, and I really if I find anything spiritually, I guess, meaningful for me, that's where I tend to fall towards. And as you bring it up, your new book, My Altered States, a lot of it's really personal and talks about your own journeys, both drug induced and not. And there are some places in it that are kind of heavy and talk about some stuff in the past. And what really inspired you to make such a personal book?
Well, I suppose I like telling stories. I'm a pretty good storyteller. Like my speaking voice isn't all that great, but my writing voice is, and I like telling stories. And I've got a lot of good stories to tell. I have no kids like I have no biological kids, and my stepkids live in Canada, and I rarely see them, and I've harangued them with enough of my stories. In a way, it's a personal legacy. Um, like all my books have been, and you know, uh, personally, a lot of people, wonder, how, um, uh, how it people are interested in how I got into this field. Um, and like in the beginning of my public appearances and whatnot, people asked me, did you ever use DMT? Have you taken psychedelics? And back then anyway, after the spirit molecule came out, I was kind of cautious about answering that. The field was so nascent, that I didn't want to do anything, to jeopardize it. So my stock answer, back then, was if I tell people that I have used DMT or other psychedelics, I might be accused of being a zealot. And if I denied using them, then I would be accused of not knowing what I was talking about. So, I just didn't answer. But I think, how people get to be the way that they are, especially if they're in any role of importance in a particular field, I think is of interest. And there's a lot of glorification of the psychedelic state. I think Michael Pollan's book both was useful with respect to increasing people's awareness of the long history of psychedelic research. But at the same time, it was a bit like gilding the lily. There weren't really any in like it was superficial with respect, to what is a fully psychedelic experience like. It isn't just all love and light and mystical experiences. It can be fairly down and dirty, and it isn't just I was afraid. It is I was afraid of this and that, and then it became this and. Then it became that. So in some ways, my book is a counterpoint to the the love and light approach to the psychedelic state, by offering a more nuanced and fulsome account of what psychedelic experiences can be like.
Right. And that's something, I mean, I really personally liked about the book that you talk about is the importance of talking about just not the good and blissful states, as I call sometimes the sunshine daydreams. But you're also talking about the kind of the bad trips as well. And I agree, it's something that we really need to talk more about as psychonauts. And, I've heard someone say something like a bad trip is a sign of a weak mind, for instance, and it kind of carries a negative stigma with it. What would your response to that? Why? What would you say your personal experience as to why it's important to gauge with these challenging experiences?
So the idea is bad trip is a sign of a weak mind. Yeah,
Right.
that's
Yeah.
that's a bit macho.
Right.
uh,
That's how I kind of took it. I was like, really? I always found them to be more learning experiences than anything.
Yeah, well, they're just bad trips. Set and setting and dose, and so your set is who you are at the time. Um, who has a strong mind all of the time? I mean, I don't know anybody. Look at
Right.
Jung.
Right.
Jung went crazy for 3 years. Um, yeah, and Freud went through a lot of problems, and yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. He
so
had his problems with the Bolivian marching powders.
yeah, and Jordan Peterson, got hooked on clonidine and oh no, I don't mean clonidine, clonazepam, and was unable to get off of it. Had horrible withdrawal. Does that mean that these people have weak minds? I think everybody has problems, and if you
Right.
amplify what's going on in your mind, which psychedelics can only amplify what's only in your mind. You're bound to have some difficult experiences. So the more important thing isn't to call yourself weak or strong or whatnot. Is to dust yourself off and figure out what happened and try to avoid that in the future by doing the work that needs to be done in order for your mind to be more settled when you trip again.
Right. That was to me. That was always my experience. Is the seemed that the best way to actually enjoy myself with some of these the higher dosage trips, especially, is I just had to kind of learn to be comfortable with myself, to know myself, and know what was going on. And once I was able to achieve that, I had no problems. So
Well, the accounts in my altered states end at 22 years old, and I did take a long break from tripping. And when I moved, to New Mexico in my early 30s, I got involved with a group that was, taking psychedelics, either brand new ones or old ones. Like it was a high level group, physicians, nurses and lawyers and psychologists and whatnot. But after a while, every single experience, no matter what the compound was, led to the same state. I was empathizing with girlfriends that had other boyfriends, and it was just ridiculous. And after a certain point, I said, I don't need any more drugs. I need therapy. And so I stopped, tripping, for years, and found myself, solid, feet on the ground, psychoanalyst who I worked with for 4 years. Yeah, and I resolved a lot of the issues which were becoming clear on drugs, but I wasn't able to resolve them in any way whatsoever.
Right, and that kind of brings me to my next point. How you mentioned in your book you analyze all of these experiences that you go through in the book through with psychoanalysis, psychopharmacology, Zen Buddhism, and Jewish metaphysics. I find it interesting how you're able to blend all these perspectives kind of into a single kind of wrap up at the end of each chapter. Can you tell me a little bit more about how these frameworks help you make sense of what you've experienced in your own life?
Um, well, like I like to read. Like as a kid, I liked reading the World Book Encyclopedia on the toilet, which I went through, twice. Once when I couldn't read, but just looked at all the pictures, and I went through every single page of every single volume. And once I learned to read, I just went back and I read every page of every volume. So I like to read. I like to learn things. I like to synthesize different ideas. Um, yeah, so each of those things, each of those fields, that you mentioned, I've spent a lot of time studying or practicing. The psychopharmacology part, I was trained in, psychoanalysis. I went through a 4-year course of a classical treatment. Taught residents psychoanalytic psychotherapy. Did it myself with my patients. Zen Buddhism, like an over 20-year relationship with a venerable community. Jewish metaphysics, that was in preparation for writing the book DMT and the Soul of Prophecy, which was an 18-year project. From beginning to end. I had to teach myself biblical Hebrew, and I read a lot of commentaries on the Hebrew Bible.
Wow, that's pretty heavy.
I became an amateur Bible scholar, but I learned my stuff. And lots of the commentators, um, or the ones I was interested in. Were flourishing in the Middle Ages, and back then it was all about metaphysics. These were the smartest people in the world, and they were trying to understand what was the Hebrew Bible saying, and how did prophecy occur, and what's the message, and what do the visions mean. Um, so I had to bone up on Neoplatonic Aristotelianism, which was the model for the Jewish philosophers back then. So and I've lived alone most of my life. And I was in Gallup for 14 years, which is in the middle of nowhere. I had no friends. And I just, like I, read and wrote. So I had the luxury to immerse myself in all of those different fields.
That is kind of interesting because I was actually reached out to, I think it was Benny Sharon at the Israeli University to talk about psychedelics in the Old Testament. They had found, I think it was cannabis residue on some of the altars. And so, yeah, I'd reached out to him. I was like, wow, that might be an interesting kind of episode conversation to have too. So
Hmm.
I mean, it kind of all ties in on that. Um, what do you think about the non-drug induced altered states, like meditation and breath work? Do they still have as much value in modern consciousness exploration?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. Well, a few of my subjects, when they came out of the big DMT state, they said, "Oh, can't you reach this state with meditation?" And I said, "Well, good luck." Um, so I think it's more reliable anyway. Taking drugs. It's also more dangerous. Because you're shot out of a cannon, and your meditation, prayer, breath work is all voluntary. You can stop whenever you want to stop. That doesn't mean that there are no adverse effects from breath work or from meditation. But I think if you're supercharging your consciousness with a strong psychedelic, the risks are greater. Um,
Right, like they say, you buy the ticket, you take the ride.
right, exactly. Yeah. Um, yeah, and to the extent that non-drug states resemble those brought on by giving DMT, it makes sense that endogenous DMT is playing a role in those states. That's a point I'd like to make in reference to the Hebrew Bible. You don't really need to look for cannabis in the residue of ritual items or speculate about the burning bush being an acacia releasing DMT fumes or the manna being an ergot containing mold. The presence of DMT in the mammalian brain militates against that endless search for outside agents.
Right, it's already there anyway.
It's already there. Exactly. Yeah.
Like the doctors say, don't go hunting for zebras. You hear hooves, it's probably horses.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot more of a parsimonious explanation. The question then becomes, what causes that elevation of endogenous DMT, and that's where practices come in, or divine grace comes in. So it changes the conversation significantly.
That's very true too. Yeah, I like it. So I was reading in your book about the default mode network and how psychedelics decrease functional relationships and higher brain functions and weakens control over the lower functions. I've mentioned in our emails that I'm autistic. I wanted to ask you. There are times when I've been on very high doses of psychedelics where it seems that my social blindness kind of just disappears, and all the social cues that I normally miss, they really become just super apparent, and it's like almost like I'm watching a play. To me, this sounds like LSD or whatever it is just messing with that default mode network, and suddenly I can see what most people see all the time, or even possibly amplify it more to the effect. To how I see it, I mean, what would your opinion on something like that be?
Yeah. Well, there were studies, back in the day, where they gave autistic, kids, psychedelics, with the hope of increasing their sociability, their interactions with folks. Those were, crude studies. They gave a kid psilocybin and interviewed them, or just had a conversation with them. Yeah, so those were promising results, but still, those kinds of studies wouldn't really hold up, nowadays. It's an interesting, question. I think, Charlie Grobe used MDMA or psilocybin. I think MDMA in a group of, spectrum adults. And, that increased, their, sociability, reading cues. I can't remember. I think it may have been even in, the archives of, general psychiatry, but it was, some time ago. Yeah, but other than that, there haven't been a lot of modern day studies using psychedelics with
Can I say,
spec.
if you ever need a guinea pig, I'm more than willing.
Well, so what happens when you microdose? Have you tried that?
I haven't tried a lot of long-term microdosing. Usually, I've tried for a few weeks, but I haven't tried like social experiments like that. Like I said, my experience is it's usually been fairly high doses of LSD when I felt like it was almost like watching a play.
Hmm.
So that's when it really came on, where I was like, "Oh wow, is this what people see all the time?"
Hmm. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I just can't think of anyone that's currently, looking at autism with, psychedelics. It would be a rich vein to mine, that's for sure.
Right. And that was also kind of part of my own inspiration. I was like, well, I'm autistic, and then I know that psychedelics kind of affect that at certain differences. I don't know if they've really been studied as much. So I figured while I had you here, it'd be an interesting question to ask.
Hmm. Yeah, and I don't know the answer.
That's fair. So,
Yeah, like I love saying I don't know. That's one of my favorite expressions or
I
terms.
that's a great one. I've been trying to use it more and more when somebody's like, "Well, what about how did this?" I'm like, I don't know.
Hmm.
I'm not a biologist, or I'm not a astrophysicist. I'm autistic with very specific um, special interests. So
Hmm.
that's how it goes. Um, do you think there's any specific reason why some people are more prone to having spiritual or mystical experiences on psychedelics, where others might just have more visual or sensory experiences?
Um, well, the nature of any particular psychedelic effect is, setting and dose. So occasionally people ask, how do you have a more spiritual, psychedelic experience? And it's kind of a dumb answer on my part, but I say, be a more spiritual person. Live a more spiritual life. So if the things you're thinking about and reading and your comrades are into spirituality, chances are that psychedelics will magnify, shine a light on certain aspects of your spirituality that you've already been working on. Same with creativity, psychological problems. Um, yeah, there have been a couple of studies using psilocybin to enhance the effects of meditation. One with ayahuasca as well. I think one was a vipassana retreat, one was a Zen retreat, and scores on meditative ability increased. Jim Fadiman, when he was back at Stanford, doing psychedelic research, gave psychedelics to scientists, that were stumped working on a specific scientific problem, and it enhanced their creativity and the answers which came up to them, or that they came up with, held up under scrutiny. Some people, do not respond to psychedelics. Just like one of our volunteers had no response whatsoever, to our very high dose of DMT. And maybe a couple of times a year, I hear from people who smoke a full dose of DMT with no effect, and other people in the room are responding normally. So I think there are some biological determinants of specific kinds of states. In the case of no response to DMT, I think it may be some mutation of the serotonin 2A receptor, which otherwise isn't affecting them in any other way. Yeah, so the biological receptivity to certain effects of these drugs, I think, is also a very interesting potential area of future research.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes sense though, and it kind of goes back to like what we were talking earlier about how kind of the Jungian collective consciousness, and as you were talking about earlier with the spirituality too, which if you go back in and that's what you're after, that's what you're putting into it. That's more what you're probably going to
Yeah,
get out of it.
yeah. Like, what else can these drugs work on other than what's in your mind?
Right, right. So, thank
Well,
you
good.
again.
Yeah, yeah. So good luck with the show.
Oh, yeah, thank you. It's been kind of a real, just it's been a work of, hey, this is what I've got to do and put my energy into,
Hmm.
and that's kind of how it's been.
Yeah. Well, so when do we do the AMA? When is
Um,
that?
I think didn't you say December 11th?
Let me check. Yeah, I'm going to be on the Joe Rogan show on the 9th.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Looks like 7:30 p.m. Mountain Time on the 11th is the AMA. So good.
Okay, yeah, Saturday. Okay, yeah, I'll be on there. I should be on there for most of the time, just looking for trolls or anything.
Darn trolls.
And yeah, I know you can't get anything nice. But
Okay.
Well, thank
So
you very much. I
it's fun.
appreciate it again, and yeah, well, I'll get the rest of this wrapped up, and I'll probably release the interview, and then the first episode will probably come out a week early. I can send you a copy if you'd like, and
Yeah, if you well, is it going to be online? Can you send me the link to where it appears?
yeah, I'm gonna be releasing early on Patreon, so I might be able to get you on there, but then then a week later I'm gonna try and where it comes out publicly on Spotify and Apple and everything the same day as your podcast or
Okay.
your AMA. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm trying to do it all so that everything kind of coordinates up, and I think it'll be awesome that way. So
Okay. Yeah. Good.
all right,
Okay.
yeah, I'll send it to you.
Okay. See you later then.
I'll see you later. I appreciate
Okay.
it.
Bye.
right, so welcome back, guys. So Brian, what'd you think?
Oh, dude, that was great. I wish I could have been there to participate in the interview, but man, it was a lot of fun listening to you guys.
Yeah, me too. It was a lot of fun. And he agreed to come back, so hopefully we'll both have a chance next time.
Oh yeah. Man, I got to tell you, like what first stood out to me was like the visions that are similar to meditation, and how that got him started on like studying all of this in the first place.
Right, and I saw something like that on the subreddit the other day. People were kind of mentioning, and Strassman talked about that. Um, it's all meditation is what was it? Somebody said psychedelics are training wheels for meditation, and it's kind of more the opposite. It's like what we were talking. Meditation you can control, you can stop at any time, where the psychedelics
Yeah,
you're there and you're stuck there, you can't control that. So kind of the other way around.
that makes a lot of sense to me because like when you think about it, like what the point of meditation is to kind of strengthen your mind a little bit by giving it space to kind of recover from all the
Right,
stress, right? And so if you're taking time to meditate and practice and get your frame of mind right before going into psychedelics, I don't see why that wouldn't lead you to a better experience.
right. That goes back to the set and setting. You
Right.
have that good mindset. Meditation helps you with that.
Yeah, that was a big takeaway from this one.
Right,
Set and
and
dose.
yeah, and that, and what did he say? There's a time you just have to kind of step away and then work on your own self. It's like a therapy, or however else you choose to do it. And I think that's an important lesson for all of us, to kind of step away. Sometimes you have to take a step back and touch grass, as they say.
Yeah.
So
Man,
yeah,
great interview.
thanks. Yeah, I really appreciate it. I can't wait to have him back. You guys check out his book on Amazon. It's coming out December 11th. I want to say some quick thanks. Shout out to Brad Burge, Integration Communications, Dylan Alien 23 did the music tonight. Speaking of which, anybody out there has got any music, send it our way. We'd love to hear it. Brian, thank you for helping me out with all this.
Of course.
Yeah, no problem. Next month we've got Joshua White from the Fireside Project coming in. We Brian actually got to be there for that one, so it was a lot of
Yep.
fun. And oh yeah, he had some really good advice and talked about what to do if you ever start to have a hard time. And that's, I mean, that's one of those subjects I think that's going to end up coming up in a lot of these conversations. I said I've a couple of times now I've heard the bad trips and what you do to how to get by that, and if it's actually a bad trip, if it's just it's a difficult time basically. And everybody, you guys, don't forget to follow us on Patreon. You'll get early access. You can chat with me. We're going to get Brian set up on one so we can all have our hashtag Brian quit his job fun. It'd be a lot of fun. Yeah. Follow us on social media: Facebook, X, um, Instagram, Blue Sky. Patreon's the big one. That's the one that's going to be able to keep us being able to do this every month. So support us there. And we'll talk to you next time, guys.